Battle-class destroyers are a pair of British BR 4.3 Tier 3s, comprised of HMS Armada D14 and HMAS Tobruk D37. They're the top destroyers of Britain's naval tree in Update 2.1 New Power, and are unique in putting the majority of their guns forward, providing them with some unique gameplay styles. First, a bit of history on the battle class. It was designed with the goal of fending off enemy air attacks, which previous British destroyers had struggled to effectively do. 7 battle-class destroyers were commissioned before the end of World War II, but only HMS Barfleur saw any action in it, notably being present in Tokyo Bay during Japan's surrender. HMS Armada was laid down in 1942 and commissioned in 1945, and notably was present during the Suez Crisis. She was scrapped in 1965. HMAS Tobruk was laid down in 1946 and commissioned in 1950, making her one of the later Australian battle-class destroyers with a slightly different weapons loadout than the earlier ones. She served in the Korean War as a carrier escort and assisted in shore bombardment. In 1960, she was damaged by HMAS Anzac during a gunnery exercise, resulted in her being moored and then scrapped in 1972. In War Thunder, HMS Armada and HMAS Tobruk come in slightly different loadouts, though both use the 114mm 45 caliber QF Mark IV cannon. Armada has 5 114mm cannons split into 3 turrets, with 2 dual turrets forward and 1 single turret amidships. Tobruk has 4 114mm cannons split into 2 turrets, with both placed forward. Both models of the dual turret have a fire rate of 20 shells per minute per gun, while the single mount present on Armada has a fire rate of 15 shells per minute. The later, boxier dual mounts on Tobruk have a faster rotation and elevation rate, however, both of the mounts are pretty close overall. The dispersion of these cannons is subpar, though it's not too bad, and is easily made up for by the high fire rate of the main cannons. The 5 guns on Armada do provide a higher overall damage output than the 4 of Tobruk, however, it doesn't tend to be in play much if the battle class is used properly. I'll cover that later. For shells, the 114mm cannon gets 4 types: HE, SAP, HETF, and HEVT. The stock HE shell has relatively low filler, however the high fire rate still gives it effective damage output against most soft targets. The SAP shell has notably lower filler and okay penetration, making it useful against cruisers and American destroyers. However, most of the time HE will still provide more overall damage output. The HETF shell is irrelevant due to the later HEVT shell, with the only advantage of it being that it can be unlocked earlier in the modifications tree. Last comes HEVT, which provides the best overall damage against unarmored surface targets and aircraft. While it's statistically identical to the HE shell other than its fuse, it still has a higher fragmentation modifier, leading to a large increase in overall damage output. These cannons are particularly excellent at close range, and they provide consistent damage output, making them pretty effective primary weapons against both surface and air targets. For anti-air defense, both battle-class destroyers come with a large number of 40mm Bofors autocannons in various mounts. Armada has 2 Stag dual mounts, 2 Mark VII single mounts, and a single Mark V dual mount for a total of 8 40mm autocannons. Tobruk has 3 Stag dual mounts and 6 single Mark VII mounts for a total of 12 40mm autocannons. These Bofors autocannons provide an incredibly strong anti-air defense, particularly towards the rear of the ship, where the majority of them can get onto a single target, making the battle-class destroyers some of the best anti-air destroyers in War Thunder. They also help defend against small PT boats that try to come in for torpedo strikes. However, there aren't many of these guns facing forward, which does give aircraft a weakness to exploit. The main guns can make up for this with HEVT shells, which makes it important to watch for incoming planes. The 40mm autocannons get a choice of 3 belt types: Default, HE, and AP. The HE belt is the best overall since it deals the most damage to aircraft and light targets. However, there's not much difference between it and the default belt, so either is fine really. Last for the battle class's armament is its torpedoes. Both Armada and Tobruk get 10 Mark IX torpedoes, which are pretty average. They have a low top speed, good travel distance, and good explosive mass. With the new damage models, they do represent a major external ammo rack, so I can't recommend bringing them, though if you do, be sure to launch them early into a battle before taking enemy fire. In survivability, the battle-class destroyers are a bit unique. Armada has a crew of 260, while Tobruk has a crew of 306, which does put them above average, though the lack of any notable hull armor does make them a bit weak overall. However, due to having most or all of their guns placed forward, the battle-class destroyers can head directly at targets with a minimal loss of firepower, while minimizing parts of the ship that can be hit, providing a huge boost to survivability. When this method is used, the battle class goes from an average destroyer to an incredibly aggressive and survivable one. The turrets are quite large and vulnerable to enemy fire still, but it still does provide a large bonus to survivability. In mobility, Armada has a top speed of 70 km per hour, while Tobruk has a top speed of 66 km per hour. These speeds are pretty good overall, though not particularly notable. For playstyle, the battle class destroyers excel at very aggressive play, using their front-mounted firepower to close the distance to enemies while taking minimal damage. Heading at enemies' bow-on reduces the surface area they can fire at, and getting in close makes the inaccuracy of the main guns less of an issue while also bringing the secondaries to bear. They're also excellent at taking out aircraft with both their primary and secondary cannons, so playing forward and ahead of your team can shield them from approaching aircraft. When engaging an enemy ship, turn yours to point directly towards them, dodging back and forth to avoid incoming shells and throw their aim off. Try to avoid directly engaging enemy cruisers, since the 114mm cannons don't deal much damage against them, even with the SAP shell. It's also worth avoiding crowded areas, instead engaging targets one-on-one so that angling towards one enemy doesn't give another your broadside to fire at. You can also play the battle class by camping behind terrain, only keeping the front of the ship poking out, so that you can fire at targets who can't really shoot back, but this playstyle is so painfully boring that I can't really recommend it. As for which of the two ships I would recommend getting first, I think that HMAS Tobruk provides an overall better package. It has 4 more 40mm cannons and more crew, while the one gun it loses isn't really that useful in most situations anyway, especially if it's played correctly. Both have identical modification unlocks, and I would recommend following this order: toolset, fire protection system, rudder replacement, auxiliary armament targeting, shrapnel protection, ventilation, propeller replacement, 4.5-inch ATVT, and engine maintenance. For modifications, I would recommend prioritizing leadership, main caliber reload speed, crew interchangeability, fire prevention, and ship control. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more naval content.